Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I was feeling really good about having the opportunity to speak here until May. And I realized, I just want to know who put this program together. Great talent, but just, the mayor said, looked at me and said, "You're screwed." I'm surprised to use such polite language. You know, it's great to be here. And what a wonderful occasion, 29 years. Pastor, it's an honor to be in your presence and to be a part of a program which recognizes your extraordinary courage and leadership. Because opening your pulpit and your home to Dr. King 50 years ago was courageous. It wasn't something everybody was going to do. Dr. King was okay when he was staying in his lane, talking about segregation in the South. But when he started talking about problems in the North and the war in Vietnam, Dr. King wasn't quite so popular. But it was the people who believed in his prophetic vision who stood by him. And we're with one of those giants today, and I hope you all value and appreciate his courage. You know, I feel a close connection to Chicago. Most black folks got roots in the South and in Chicago. My grandmother was a graduate of Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. But she came to Chicago in 1914, got a job in the Chicago public schools, went over to the University of Chicago and got some more education, and taught in these public schools from 1914 to 1944. And my dad was a product of the Chicago public schools, went from there to Northwestern, but in 1928 they wouldn't let a black student live in the dormitory. And he had to stay in the basement of the president's home with another black student, Rufus Clement, who became the president of Atlanta University. But my dad and my family didn't like it, so they moved him over to the University of Illinois, where he graduated in 1932. A lot to overcome even then, or more then, but still today. But for the last 50 years, I've called Atlanta, Georgia home. So today's breakfast honoring Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement are deeply personal subjects for me. And this morning, I want to speak from the heart about Dr. King, the holiday we celebrate today, and the work that I believe we are all called to do for our communities and our children, if we are to truly honor the great sacrifices Dr. King and his generation of activists made for us. The sacrifices of thousands of ordinary Americans who acted selflessly and courageously to end segregation and legal discrimination in America. Ordinary Americans whose lives and actions are so powerfully and poignantly recreated in the film Selma. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. And more important than you going to see it, make sure the children see it. I was just talking to Desiree Rogers, And Desiree and folks around the country have been participating in a viral fundraising program, Mayor, started by two businessmen in New York, Bill Lewis and Chuck Phillips. They raised $10,000 from 27 folks in New York City, $270,000, and arranged for 27,000 kids in New York to see the film. Then they challenged folks all across the country in every city they knew. They caught me for Atlanta. And I got the president of Morehouse to join me. We raised $100,000 in 5 days. We've raised $2 million today. So find out who's raising those dollars here in Chicago and make sure the kids get a chance to see that film. But you know, I was so deeply touched by the film. I was telling to somebody this morning, there's some old wounds, old memories. You pack them away, you cover them up. And that film brought so much back, but it also brought visions of average folks who didn't necessarily have a stake in Selma, but knew they had a stake in Selma, Senator. Christians and Jews, black and white, Americans all. The film Selma made me remember the first time I marched with Dr. King in 1966, my sophomore year at Morehouse College in Atlanta. Less than a year after the Selma campaign, 1966 had started horribly, violently, on January 3rd, with the murder of Sammy Young. You don't know Sammy Young, you never heard of him. A 22-year-old Navy veteran who had recently come home to Tuskegee, Alabama, enrolled at Tuskegee Institute, and joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. I had first come to Tuskegee in 1961 with my mother, a freelance journalist writing about the civil rights movement. That year, I'd attended Tuskegee Institute High School and gotten to know Sammy. Sammy was the privileged son of two college graduates. He lived a good middle-class life. Tuskegee, you were separated and sequestered from the worst violence of the South. But when Sammy returned from the Navy in 1964, he had matured into an activist, no longer willing to play by the rules of Southern segregation and white supremacy. On January 3rd, he stood up to and defied a white man at the Greyhound bus station in the center of Tuskegee. The man shot him dead, was tried and later acquitted, and Sammy Young became the first black college student to die in the civil rights struggle. That same January, 120 miles away in Atlanta, another story of defiance and retribution was playing out. This time at the state capitol, where Julian Bond, a former Morehouse student and member of SNCC since its founding, was defying the rules and was about to experience his own interaction with the rough justice of the South. In 1965, Julian Bond had run for and won a seat in the Georgia House of Representatives. Shortly before his swearing in, however, Julian did something he was accustomed to doing all of the time. He expressed his personal view on a matter of international importance. He expressed his opposition to the war in Vietnam and said that he supported the young men who refused to be drafted into fighting an unjust war. His new colleagues in the Georgia General Assembly were having none of that. And the Georgia General Assembly. Now, these are people who opposed most decisions made in Washington. These are folks who were not abiding by the Constitution. These are folks who were avoiding the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. These folks assembled a trial and judged his actions treasonous, found him guilty, and refused to seat him in the Georgia General Assembly, to which he had been duly elected. And it was to protest Julian Bond's expulsion from the Georgia House of Representatives that prompted Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis to come to Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, and Atlanta University and the Interdenominational Theological Center, the Atlanta University Center, to rally 1,500 black college students to march to the state capitol, carrying signs and singing freedom songs and speaking out in behalf of our duly elected Representative Julian Bond. There was no violence, no brutality from state troopers, not like it was in Selma, but I will forever remember the crowd that flooded out from the state capitol and stood around the Gold Dome, massed, a sea of white, I guess to intimidate, perhaps to threaten. But they couldn't stop us. And the courts ultimately righted this wrong, but our protest sent a message that as citizens, we knew our rights and supported our state representative and his constitutional right to freedom of speech. We would not be intimidated. Georgia would have to change, and we would be part of forcing that change in 1966. The last time I marched as a student to the Georgia State Capitol came 2 years later, in April of 1968, just days after the assassination of Martin Luther King. This time, there were no signs, no freedom songs sung, just thousands of students, faculty, administrators, who silently marched to the state capitol, paused for prayer, and then silently returned to campus, where Dr. King's body lay in state. For the days leading up to his funeral, long lines of mourners stood quietly Pastor Evans, day and night, waiting their turn to enter Sisters' Chapel at Spelman College, where Dr. King's body lay in an open casket. A young martyr struck down in his prime, and grief-stricken mourners by the tens of thousands wept and prayed, traumatized by the terror and violence that still had a stranglehold on the South. But Dr. King, in life and now in death, was still loosening that vicious grip. Weeks later, shortly before my graduation, Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. The violence just seemed to be everywhere. At my graduation, the newly widowed Coretta Scott King and Chief Justice Earl Warren sat on the stage as the Glee Club hauntingly sang "The Impossible Dream." And 100 young men of the Morehouse class of 1968, each deep in his own thoughts, considered how we would live our lives in America, a nation forever changed by a young dreamer who had spent his brief life transforming the possibilities of ours. His death meant we had to live our lives differently. The question was, would we use our educations to make a difference as he had? Would we find our way to carry on the struggle to achieve justice for all Americans? Would we be, as he challenged all of us to be, drum majors for justice? For over a quarter century now, communities all across our nation have paused on January 15th or 16th to reflect on the life of Martin Luther King and to celebrate his work. We have had wonderfully joyous celebrations. We're having one here today. But we have also heard from incredible speakers who have brought us thoughtful and challenging messages inspired by the life and work of Dr. King. We have heard from men and women whose lives and life work have borne witness to the transformational impact of the civil rights movement and Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent social action. Nonviolent social action. Dr. King told us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The testimonies of the speakers who have graced our King program stages have reaffirmed that truth. Now, we know we have not yet achieved Dr. King's ideal of the beloved community. But we, you and I, we the people, can and must persist in seeking, working for, and championing that ideal. And if we ever ran the risk of complacency, of feeling that everything is fine now, because we're in the ballroom of the Hilton. Recent events in Ferguson, in New York City, in a park in Cleveland, Ohio, have been brutal reminders that racial injustice is still too prevalent in our great nation. There is still a lot of work to be done. And at UNCF, we have felt a renewed sense of urgency about our work. For 71 years, we have urged all Americans, not some Americans, but all Americans, to embrace our mission of ensuring that Black and other minority low-income Americans have equal opportunity and access to achieve a college education. The mayor told you that's essential today. We have championed education so that every American can have the chance to live the enriched lives that come with the knowledge and skills, credentials, and degrees that only post-secondary education makes possible. But our renewed urgency also comes from the recognition that our work not only helps individuals ensure that they will live more financially secure lives and enjoy greater opportunities, but also because a better educated citizenry has the knowledge, the habits of mind, the intellectual gravitas, the wisdom essential to nurture, preserve, and protect our democracy. Our democracy that Dr. King and Sammy Young gave their lives to make better for us. We need not only to prepare new generations of Americans for good jobs that fuel our economy, but also to prepare them to be wise, thoughtful, and compassionate leaders, to be the followers in the footsteps of Dr. King. And more than ever, we must ensure that we have a diverse pipeline of talented and educated Americans prepared to lead in our faith communities, Pastor, our business and professional communities, our political sector, our criminal justice sector, our media, and all across this nation. There is too much at stake. We cannot afford to lose any lives to violence and destruction, but we also can't lose any more lives, squander any more lives with self-destructive behavior. Message to the young people in our community: your life is too valuable to throw it away. Invest in it. Build it. Now, I believe education is fundamental. I believe education is the foundation. So we must recommit on this day and in this place to do all we can to make access to a great education the rule and not the exception for all of our children, for all of the children of Chicago, not just for some children, for all of the children here and everywhere else. And that is why UNCF has urged all Americans, all Chicagoans, to embrace our cause. And it is why we have reiterated our message in the now iconic and amended words of our motto, a mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. And it is why today our motto not only articulates UNCF's core values, but it has also become a preamble to our national call to action, challenging each of us and our nation to provide excellent educations for all. And this morning, it is the foundation for my call to action to Chicagoans. When it comes to education, our children, we can't just talk the talk, Chicago. We got to walk the walk. Dr. King's vision and the work of the civil rights movement were based in the belief that all Americans must have equal citizenship rights. And while the movement removed the legal barriers that deprived Black Americans of our rights, we have not enjoyed equivalent opportunity or prosperity. And education attainment now stands as a formidable barrier, separating our aspirations from our achievement for far too many low-income children of color. Here in Chicago, Mayor Emanuel has asserted boldly his belief that every child in every neighborhood deserves a high-quality education that prepares them to graduate 100% college ready and 100% college bound. Makes sense? Makes sense? But it doesn't happen with a declaration, does it, Mayor? You got to work. And you've got to work as a community in agreement. Do you know how many Black kids graduate in America college ready? You know what college ready means? College ready means that in math, reading, language arts, science, that student will sit in a college classroom and take a 4-credit course, not a remedial course. 5% of African American children graduate high school in this country college ready. That 100% goal that the mayor has articulated, that's going to require work. The mayor knows that opportunity and education are inextricably linked. Our children need rigorous, that means hard, advanced educations to compete successfully in the Chicago workforce and the global economy. We got folks who say, this Common Core stuff is too hard. Water it down. Make you feel better, but it won't make you competitive with China, won't make you competitive with India. We can't learn lesser math. We have to learn the real math. His education blueprint mirrors that of President Obama. And the mayor needs us to support his plan just as President Obama needs us to support his plan in the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Senator. We need to do both. They both know our children must be college and career ready, and they need us to support the important education changes that will ensure that outcome. Education, however, is more than about just jobs and the economy. We need educated and engaged citizenry to remain a vibrant democracy. And across every sector, we need diverse cadres of leaders to ensure that our nation embraces, protects, and nurtures all her people equally and fairly. Dr. King and Sammy Young died so we could vote. How come we don't vote? How come we don't vote? Part of the reason we don't vote is because when we elect folks, they behave so badly. But that's another speech. So here in Chicago, in the spirit of Martin Luther King, I challenge leadership to action. To the faith community, it is imperative that you continue to be the bridge of faith, family, and the future. Your work to have after-school childcare and academic programs in the communities you serve go a long way toward giving hope and a safe haven to students while they prepare for their futures. Faith has always been the foundation for stable communities. Do not stop giving our children the building block of faith that becomes the stepping stone to success. To the corporate community, it is your time to search and reach deeper into your philanthropic coffers for more resources to invest and more opportunities to serve. Private sector, ask yourselves, is our workforce fully engaged in community transformation? Is our corporate citizenship setting standards and creating more role models, or are we just following slowly behind others? Are our executives known beyond the boardroom? Ask, if our corporation were to go away today, would the average Chicagoan notice? You got to be involved. To the public and civic leadership, elected officials, this is a perfect time to transform and transcend partisanship. What lessons would young Chicagoans learn if healthy debate and mutual respect were the rules of engagement for political discourse? Politics has become a blood sport. So don't ask me why the kids are violent too. We don't know how to be civil in the civil society. What would happen if the straight lines that separate us were to become circles of inclusion? What would happen, Chicago, if all children knew in their hearts they could go to college and pursue the career of their dreams regardless of skin color, gender, or socioeconomic position, and not be strapped with debt too heavy to bear? Chicago has, with the mayor, laid that vision out there. Now we've got to make sure that our children believe enough in themselves to take advantage of that opportunity. This call to action, Chicago, is not just so that this great city can achieve its goals. It is a call to action to ensure that this great nation can achieve its goals. The goals are founded on the beliefs and principles of the civil rights movement and the vision of Dr. King. So as we celebrate this 29th Interfaith Breakfast, what is the lesson of Dr. King for us today? What is the lesson of Selma and the Edmund Pettus Bridge? What is the lesson of Sammy Young dying because he dared to challenge injustice? What is the lesson of Julian Bond exercising freedom of speech and not allowing bigots to silence him? The lesson is that where we see hard problems that need solving, that where we encounter obstacles that require strength to remove them, that where fear and timidity prevail and courage is required, that we, the people, you and I, must act. And when we do, we will make a difference for the good. We will have done our part. Chicago, let's heed the voices and follow the actions of those who have gone before. We can all be drum majors for justice. If not here, Chicago, where? If not today, when? That is my challenge now. Thank you, and God bless you.